We are in a prolonged series in the book of Luke. We started in December. I love what Brad said to me. Brad walked up to me this morning right before the service, and he looked at me and he said, like with last week's message. I said, yeah. He said, it's so great. Every time I put my foot in my mouth, I think of you now. This didn't seem like a warm greeting to me at all, but I guess to Brad, this was a real show of affection. So I'd hate to see what your anniversary's like at home. You might want to write your top 10 encouraging list down, and then we'll throw it away for eternity. And he said, no, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I don't take it so heavily upon myself. If you have a Bible, we're going to be in a little teeny section in chapter 6. There's Bibles in the chairs in front of you. I was going to say underneath you, but that'll get a little awkward. So just in front of you. The section that we're in, we're going to spend 4 weeks. In Luke, it's typically called the Sermon on the Plain. In Matthew, it's called the Sermon on the Mount, just because geographically they both kind of give a little bit different pinpoint as to where it was. Whether it was a couple of sermons, one sermon, that was reproduced and given at different stages, and nobody really knows. Matthew's is the much longer version, although I've grown to love. Every time I used to read Luke's, I would just go, oh, this is the short version. I want to just go to the real one. And then now I've realized how poetic the Luke version is. We're going to go slightly out of order. I'm jumping on a plane on Tuesday with Brian Fury and Rhonda, and my daughter Kelly's coming back from school, and Jeremy Mann over here, and we're going to jaunt over to Israel for 8 days. We try to go about every 18 months or so. That's about right. So this will be my 4th time standing on the dirt. We're gonna do it on our own this time. I've gone to study groups and studied with the professors. We're going to do this kind of a little more ad lib and lead our own lessons over 8 days and run our heads off like crazy. So Nate Milheim will be here for the next 2 weeks, which is an upgrade. We all know that. So we'll go with that. And I'll actually be back to the second one, which I'm excited about. I have to tell you, I just told Ron, I got choked up sitting here. We had this whole service planned out. And I had this couple that I was going to bring up. They're rather new to our church, and I wanted to interview them in front of the church because I'm going to actually preside over their wedding in March, and I'm excited about that and them and our relationship. And they couldn't do it. And so we had another family, the Rondani's was supposed to come up this morning, and they were going to kind of share. And they've got like 40-something kids. And so when you have that many kids, at least a quarter of them are going to be sick. So I don't know, they've got 12 homesick. I don't know how many it is. And so they couldn't do it. And so we just gathered together and said, all right, God's obviously not in these things. He's doing something different this morning. And we all huddled in the back and were praying. And of course, Brian ends up sharing right out of the text this morning. And then you all share right out of what we're going to study this morning. We're studying together, so this will be very, very easy to go with. God has His own plan this morning. And I just want to get on the surfboard and ride the same way. So I'm excited about that. Nate will then backtrack a little in the text, and he'll go through the middle section. This section that we're in, the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew and the Sermon on the Plain in Luke both end the same way, with this little parable. And it's a parable, if you have been in church too long, like I have, and I say that facetiously, you've done this felt board, you've done this with puppets, you've done this in song, the wise man built his house upon a rock. Anybody can sing that with me? Please don't. I'll have to slap you. The literary form of this parable in Luke 6 is called step parallelism. And in much of Luke, it's actually poetry. Much of the Bible is poetry. In fact, Jeremy was pointing out in Genesis 11, it's actually written in poetic form, it's everywhere. Derek Ewan came up to me a week ago, and he's going to start teaching the book of Daniel a week from Sunday. That Sunday's your last Sunday. He said he's blown away. Much of Daniel is written in poetry. And again, like Jeremy mentioned this morning, because we don't know Hebrew or we don't know Greek, we miss the beauty behind the beauty, if you will. And so, why don't we read this together this morning, or I'll read it and you can listen. And we'll be in chapter 6 and verse 46 through 49. And like in any of these written step parallelism where it's ABC and then it's ABC, it's the end of each of those ABCs, if you will. That's the punchline. In this case, it's the storm of this parable. He says this. Jesus says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord?" By the way, this is the way he's going to end this grand sermon. "And do not do what I say. Everyone coming to me and hearing my words and doing them, I will show you whom he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid a foundation on the rock. And when a flash flood occurred, the stream burst against that house, and the stream could not shake it, because it had been well built." Then he'll start over again. "And the one who has heard and has not acted accordingly is like a man who built a house on the ground without any foundation, and the stream burst against it, and immediately it collapsed, and the ruin of that house was great." Most people want to build a house once in their lifetime. How many of you have ever built a house? Raise your hand. Okay. You will be able to finish this sentence. Because Lynn and I built the house that we're living in, or had it built and did sections of it. I always wanted to build a house, and now having done it,
I'll never do it again.
Yeah.
there's the answer. I hesitate to say this with Brian and Rhonda in the room, but he's right in the middle of it. There's a cement shortage in the world right now, and it's all because of these two. You have never seen so much. Brian and I own radiation centers. We built vaults to put these $4 million linear accelerators in. The walls are 8 feet thick. Right? There's not as much concrete in these walls as the Furies have with the foundation of their house. I want you to know that. So, if our seniors fail, we're going to put a linear accelerator in their basement and keep on treating. So, anything bad goes in your life, just let Brian and I know. My wife and I built a house about 15 years ago in the same neighborhood that I grew up in, actually. I did not plan on that. And right up the road here on Stone Valley Road. It was a brutal time. We had a 2-year-old daughter at home. My son was just born, so his first year and a half was, his room was the laundry room. And so that's where he lived, in this little condo we rented out in San Ramon. I was working all week. My wife was working all weekend. And because we were so broke, we had to do some of the work on the house. My wife tiled all 3 bathrooms. She did all of the tile work and granite work on the fireplaces. I painted the place inside and out. And when I say I painted the place inside and out, you would think we picked one color, and no, that's not how it worked. I painted the outside of the house, and my wife said, "It looks a little too blue." I said, "That's because it's blue." And she said, "No, we got to do it again." So I painted it again. I painted the inside of the house all white. I primered it and painted it. And my wife said, "It's too white." I said, "Because it's white." She said, "Listen to this, it makes my lips dry." Anybody that's met Linda knows this is just a consistent comment. My answer to her, which Brad, I can see you saying this to your wife, put some chapstick on. No, we needed to go with more of a, which I didn't know was a term, eggshell white. So, I painted, the house now is about 7 feet thick with just paint. I never want to do this again. If you build a house in the ancient Near East, it was way worse than even that. In Israel, they typically only would build during the summer months. Late spring and summer months. Their weather is just like ours. Very much like California. So right now it's 65, 70. You may have rain, you may not. In the summer it's beautiful in Jerusalem. It's maybe 85, 90, 95, something like that. Much hotter in the desert like it is in our desert. The rains come in the winter. You don't want to build in the winter. But in the summertime, it's nice. The weather's dry. It's a great time to do it. But there is a drawback like here. It can be warm. And the ground can be very hard. Like we have that adobe dirt, it gets really hard. It's the same way. So it's not hard to imagine somebody wanting to cut some corners and build at a different time. The ground is hard in the summer. It's extremely hot in a lot of places. You know there's bedrock down there somewhere because there's bedrock all over Israel. So you cut some corners. The walls are only 7 feet high anyway in a Middle Eastern home. You stick it on the ground knowing there's bedrock underneath and you call it a day. The problem is you have a very wet winter. The hard ground becomes putty underneath your walls. It begins to wash underneath your walls. In Israel, in this particular time, in the first century, they used mud for mortar. You can imagine all of that dissolving, and the story ends a little bit like 2 of the 3 little pigs, which is not what you want to do. I read a great story. It says this. The Friday, October 4th, 1991 issue of the English Language Weekly in Jerusalem reported the collapse of an apartment complex in the Jerusalem suburb of Talpiot. The night of August 28, 1991, a third of the complex collapsed, and 28 families were forced to evacuate. After investigation was discovered that a sewer line had leaked water under the collapsed third, which had been built on loose soil rather than on the bedrock, as is accepted practice. Interior walls buckled, and a 4th floor bathtub fell into the 3rd floor below it. The destruction... Brian, this won't happen. Just stay calm. The destruction is massive and resembles that of a major earthquake, read a report. If the construction engineers had simply read Luke 6, 46 through 49 before starting building, they might have saved themselves a lot of trouble. They could have used this particular parable. In Israel, bedrock is everywhere, but you have to dig to it. If you're in the flatlands, you might have to dig more than 10 feet to get to the bedrock. If you're up on a hilltop, the bedrock might literally be exposed or be just below the surface. But if you ask the Middle Easterner, if you ask them in Israel, how far down do you need to dig? The answer is always the same, to the bedrock. They give you the same answer every single time. You dig to the bedrock. This parable, this image, this bedrock, this foundation on which you build your house is not a new concept that Jesus is making up in this parable. It's an ancient parable, if you will, that Israel has known before. In the 8th century BC, for those of you that were in our study of the Old Testament last year, Israel had split in 2. Judah was in the south, Israel was in the north. Israel in the north was just a heinous group of people. They had king after king. Not one single king that ruled Israel in the north ever acknowledged God. And after a long period of time, God had had enough. And God was raising up the Assyrian nation, this great empire, to come down and basically let them know this is not the way to live and to take them off of their land. Assyria was coming, so what Israel in the north did was they made a pact with the devil, if you will. They made a pact with Egypt, the other superpower on the other side of them in the south. And Egypt had some really lousy worldviews. One of their worldviews was they were very much into the dead. Obviously, that's where we get all this pyramid stuff from. And if you've ever spent time there, it's amazing to see. But in a sense, they made a covenant with death because they really worship the gods of the dead. And this image of the covenant of the death, Isaiah borrows from. And when Isaiah speaks, the prophet to Israel to warn them, he wants to tell them, you've put your foundation in the wrong place. You have relied instead of on God, you're relying on Egypt to save you from the Assyrians. Listen to what Isaiah says in chapter 28. Therefore hear the word of the Lord, O scoffers, who rule this people who are in Jerusalem. Because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, there's Egypt, and with Sheol, and have made a pact. The overwhelming scourge will not reach us when it passes by. See, their thought was, we already had an alignment with Egypt. We're safe now. We've put our foundation in this other country, and they will keep us safe. And he's saying, you're not safe at all. For we have made a falsehood our refuge, and we have concealed ourselves with deception. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a costly cornerstone, for the foundation firmly placed. He who believes in it, which is interesting, meaning him, will not be disturbed. I will make justice the measuring line, and righteousness the level. Then hail will sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters will overflow the secret place. Your covenant with death will be canceled, and your pact with Sheol will not stand. When the overwhelming scourge passes through, then you become its trampling place. God says that through Isaiah there's hope. You put your hope in the wrong place. You built your foundation on Egypt, and they're not going to save you. Oh, but there's another foundation coming. And if you place your hope in that foundation, and he doesn't clarify what it is, then your life will work. Now, zooming forward 800 years in the time of Jesus, we've talked about the fact that there were multiple groups. There were zealots who fought back physically against Rome. We've got groups like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and we've talked about all of those groups, and you can find those online if you want to listen to those sermons and catch up. There was one particular group called the Essenes. The Essenes were totally fed up with the leadership in Israel. They thought the temple was corrupt, and it was. They thought the leadership was corrupt, and it was. They just had disdain for the priesthood in Jerusalem during the time of Jesus, and they had good right to be. So they literally said, we're done with the whole thing. The temple, the priest, Jerusalem, they moved out into the desert. We know the place is Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. Well, the Essenes studied the Scriptures daily, and they sought to understand these words of Isaiah. This is what the people during Jesus' time, the Essenes, came up with. In the council of the community, there shall be 12 men and 3 priests, perfectly versed in all that is revealed of the Torah, whose words shall be truth, righteousness, justice, loving kindness, and humility. When these are in Israel, when this gets established with these 12 holy men, it shall be that tried wall, that precious cornerstone, whose foundation shall neither rock nor sway in their place. See, for the Essenes, the cornerstone, the new foundation, was not Egypt. It was God raising up 12 holy men that were dedicated to Torah, that would carry them to God. The rabbis had a different thought in Jerusalem. In the Mishnah it says this: after the ark was taken away, the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies on the Temple Mount, after the ark was taken away, a stone remained there from the time of the early prophets, and it was called the Shetiah, the foundation. It was higher than the ground by 3 finger lengths. On this he used to place the fire pan. So this is what the rabbis said, different than the Essenes. The Essenes said, we will have 12 holy men that will be dedicated to Torah, and we will build our foundation before God on these men. The rabbis said, no. The cornerstone foundation that we build our life is in the center of the center of the center. Jerusalem is the center of the world. The temple is the center of Jerusalem. The Holy of Holies is the center of the temple. And the cornerstone, the Shetiah, that is raised 3 lengths higher, that is the center of the center of the center of the center. And we will place our foundation there because that's where the presence of God rests. And what they're speaking of here, the rabbis, is once a year, the high priest, on the Day of Atonement, during this 12-hour service, would have a pan. And it would be full of burning coals. On the top of the burning coals, he would lay incense. That would be this fragrant aroma that would go up to God, that God would smell and enjoy, and would please God and make him happy. He would lay this fire pan of burning coals with the incense on top of it on the Shetiah. And it would raise up to God. Jesus comes along, this crazy, young, itinerant rabbi, and says, let me offer you a third translation of Isaiah to this group of people. Jesus says, to hear my words and act on them is to build on the foundation. And in essence, what he says, I actually personally am the fulfillment of what Isaiah spoke about 600 years ago. I am actually the cornerstone. I am actually the foundation on which you build your life. Not Egypt, not 12 holy men, not the Torah. Not the actual rock within the Holy of Holies, the center of the center of the center of the center. I am the great one, he says. I am the Shetiah that you build your life on. Jesus knew, for example, what was coming for Israel. It was just like their warnings before. Israel in the north had disregarded God, and they built their foundation on something other than God. And God moved the Assyrians in and moved them out. Some 150 years later, in 586, 587 BC, the south of Judah, they decided, we will not place our foundation on God. We will do things the way we want to do, despite God's warnings. And God moved the Babylonians in, and they got to leave their land for 70 years. And now it's happening all over again. And Rome is here. And Rome exists. And Jesus says, if you don't wake up, if you don't acknowledge that what you've built the foundation of your life on is false, it is not going to save you. If you don't realign your foundation stone, if you don't decide who the Shetiah is in your life, then God is going to do what he's done twice already. And in fact, Jesus dies, and some 30 years later, Rome annihilates Jerusalem. They siege Jerusalem for 4 straight years. We'll study this a lot in the coming months. In 70 AD, Jerusalem is leveled. The Temple Mount is completely burned and destroyed. For 2,000 years, that Temple Mount is a parking lot. The first time I got to go up on the Temple Mount, I was so underwhelmed with what I saw. I was so excited to go on the Temple Mount. This is where the Holy of Holies is, right? This is Mount Moriah. This is crazy stuff. And I got up there, and I just went, geez, this is really, I mean, you got a mosque over here, and an old Muslim shrine, and the rest of it's just weeds and, some broken up concrete, gravel. It's very, very unimpressive. Jesus' words have stood for 2,000 years. If you don't check your foundation stone, the place will be leveled. And nobody has been able to make it work ever since. But like Isaiah, Jesus offers hope in this message, in this parable. He offered himself as the new foundation on which the temple was built, his very own body. Jesus is saying to them, no longer will the presence of God dwell in a box. No longer will God's presence dwell and hover over a stone 3 lengths higher than the rest. But the presence of God will emanate from me, the expected one, the great prophet from of old, the Messiah. Jesus is saying to them, I am the Shetiah on whose presence the Father emanates through. That is an amazing statement. Through faith in Jesus, real faith. Faith that accepts him as the expected one and then shows a simple act of gratitude. To hear and to act, Jesus says, the resulting response will be, you will now house the expected Shetiah of God. Listen to what Paul said in Corinthians. The Corinthians church in 1 Corinthians was some of the most sinful folks you've ever seen. This is a Christian church that had gone so far awry. You read some of the stuff in Corinthians, you just go, wow, are you sure you're still a church? It was ugly. Listen to what Paul says to them who were struggling in sin and couldn't get their life straight. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? This is Paul's solution to a church that is completely and utterly corrupt in sin. Not, boy, get this straightened out, you gotta stop doing this, there's a list of other things, which he mentions, by the way. No, what Paul says to them is, the issue is you have no sense of what is going on inside you. Jesus has stepped in where the temple failed. He is where the presence of God dwells, and he is in you if you've received his payment for sin. The presence of God literally dwells, if you will. Think of your soul and your heart and your mind as the Shetiah stone. And Jesus dwells there, and on top of that stone, the presence of God is just enveloping you. You are the new temple. Boy, I tell you, you look at the temple Solomon built, it is as grand can be. It was the marvel of the world. And when Herod the Great rebuilt it, magnificent structure. Even though it's an ugly parking lot with a couple of bad-looking mosques, it is still inspiring. It is massive. There are stones on the foundation of that temple. And we've stood there, six guys, finger to finger, to measure one stone on the foundation of that thing. They're so big. I don't know how they cut these things, how they moved them, how they placed them there. And God, Jesus looks at all that and says, that is nothing compared to the temple I now dwell in. In 2 Corinthians, Paul says this, of what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God, just as God said, I will dwell in them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore come out from their midst and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will welcome you. Listen to this. I will be a father to you, and you will be sons and daughters of the Most High, says the Lord Almighty. This is in part why I think Jesus finishes this amazing sermon, best sermon I think ever given, with this crazy little parable. Jesus is saying, I am the new foundation stone to build your life. I am. Not the building, not the Holy of Holies, not the Shetiah stone on the ground. I am the great Shetiah that you build your life on. I'm the person that the presence of God emanates from. And I dwell in you. Jesus is saying, I am the center stone of foundation that God's presence dwells in. The Holy of Holies was the center of everything. And Jesus now says, you are the center of everything the three of us want to do. Everything. Everything that I just wait for. Ever enter your mind, and I do not say this out of guilt, I say this out of, wow, are you missing it? Ever enter your mind that if you receive Christ, the presence of God that dwelt in the Holy of Holies for a millennium dwells literally in you. God is not just amongst you. God is not following you around. God is not hovering above you. God is within you if you know Christ personally. I think what happens is we get overly captivated by what we're doing, and we miss who we're doing it with. My daughter is just a classic overthinker. She's a firstborn, and if you're a firstborn or have firstborns, you know what this is like. It's exhausting. I don't know who's more exhausting for, her or Linda and I. But this I will say about her. She digs at her soul. She digs at her heart. She said to me, she just keeps repeating the same pattern over and over. She said to me this week on the phone, Dad, I'm so tired of making these mistakes and thinking like this. I want it now. I want to think like you think now. I said, sweetie, I'm 48, and you have no idea how rattled I am. And you're 20. Don't worry. Well, she has been wrestling over what to do this summer. And she's one of these people, I don't know where she gets this from, she just sucks the marrow out of everything. I mean, everything is the greatest. She just wants to do everything. And she said, I've only got so many summers in college and so many summers the rest of my life, and I got to get it all in right now. And she's already been to Uganda and worked with orphans. And last summer she was a camp counselor at Mount Herman. So this summer's coming up. School's going to stop for a few weeks. And it doesn't matter whether she's got Lyme disease. She's just going to keep pouring forward even though she's exhausted and falling apart. And it doesn't matter. I've got to get more of God. And so what am I going to do this summer? And, she's just thinking and praying and sending 8,000 emails out and seeing what God's going to do. And God hasn't been in any of them. It's been kind of funny, actually. Not to her, but I've been quite amused by it. He hasn't been in camp. He hasn't been in overseas things. He just isn't opening doors for her. And so in a day of fit, where after she finally thought she got this, she said, Dad, I'm going to rethink going back to Mount Herman but doing high school kids.
And then by the end of the day, she goes, she said, Dad, I realize I'm producing all of this. God is not laying this on my heart. I just said, I'm so afraid to not accomplish something. I'm so afraid I'm not going to do something big. I'm so afraid I'm going to miss something. You know, God is not in any of that, by the way. That's her ego talking. And so she decides that night, I'm not going to go to Ponderosa and be a camp counselor. I'm decided. The next day, she gets a text message from somebody she hasn't talked to in months and months and months. And the text message just gives her this really, and I can't go into the details, very, very affirmative answer why she wouldn't want to go to Ponderosa this time. And the whole time she's talking about this, she just keeps saying, what's God saying? What's He saying? Is He saying this? Is He saying this? And I just laughed. And she said, Dad, what are you laughing at? I said, you are more interested in what He said to you than that He said something to you. She didn't understand what I meant. It took me 10 minutes to re-explain that statement. I said, honey, you're going over and over about the words that you felt like God gave you in that text and what they mean and do they mean this. None of that has anything to do with being with God. I said, let me say this crassly to you. The God of the entire universe, who, by the way, has a lot to do, felt it important to Him to tap some dude on the shoulder that lives somewhere else to send you a text message to let you know something you already knew. Doesn't that do something to your insides? Does that make sense? This is where our life is. This is what our goal should be. Our goal is not what we do for God. In fact, let me redefine something for you. If what you think about is what you do for God, there's something really horrible in that comment. As if God tells you something and you're done with Him now. And now you're just going to go off on your little trek and do all this stuff as if God's not present at all. All the while, mind you, the Shetia, Jesus, who dwells inside you, who emanates His presence out of you, is with you anyway, but you're too busy for that. Right? Like I am. You've got stuff to do. It is not as if we're not to do things, by the way. The Sermon on the Mount has plenty of them. But what we do, if it is not with the recognition that it is with God, we miss it. This is why we lack passion. This is why we lack life. Why we lack this life's a gift, rejoice, leap for joy kind of stuff. When we know the God of the universe says, I can't think of a better place to live than in you, when that grips you for a second, and I mean a second, it should make you just go into a puddle emotionally. If it doesn't, you don't believe it. The Dave Eckman comment. Truth? What Brian is, your emotions do not dictate the truth. They validate your understanding of the truth. If you don't have an emotional reaction to that, then you don't believe it. Make that your goal this week. And not as a setup, because you're going to fail all week long, by the way. I wonder if just once today, somewhere in my day, I can recognize that Jesus dwells within me. When I go to the store, when I say hi, when I fill up my truck, right? When I am in the yard, when I'm wrestling with my spouse, when I'm talking to one of my kids, when I'm at work, it doesn't matter where you are. The Spirit of God, through the great Shetia, is with you, emanating Himself on your behalf. One of my favorite stories in the whole Bible is Moses in the Old Testament. It's around Exodus 32, 33. It would be a great read later today. God is so fed up with Israel after getting them out of Egypt. He says, Moses, step aside. I'm killing all of them. I'm so frustrated. Moses does this great thing.
if you do that, you'll look stupid, is basically what Moses says to them. You just got them out of Egypt. You get them out of Egypt and then kill them all. That's just not going to look good. God goes, you're right. I won't do it. But this is what God says to Moses. He says, okay, I won't kill them, but I'm really tired of them. Here's the deal. I'll send my angels with you, and you go to the promised land, but I'm not going with you. Anybody remember what Moses says to him? Then I'm not going. That's a pretty bold comment to God, I kind of think. Moses says, here's the arrangement, God. Let me tell you what the arrangement is. Either you go and I go, or you stay and I stay, but I will not accept something in the middle. That is a guy who gets it. Now, mind you, he was going to have angels go with him. I mean, these are like, when an angel shows up, people buckle. And I don't know, because I've never seen one, I don't think, or if I have, I'm blind, which is probably more possible. They buckle. And Moses is going, yeah, really? Not so much. You're the one I want, God. I want to go with you. The promised land. It's the promised land. I mean, he promised this to Abraham, then to Isaac, then to Jacob, then to his 12 sons, and then a bunch of 400 years later, and he's going to let Moses go, and Moses still says, nah, not so much. Not if you're not there. And if you have ever been or seen where Moses was when he said it is, if it's not hell, it's right next to it. It's the worst place I've ever been in my life. The Sinai area, we took a Jeep ride out in the Sinai one time, which was really fun. It is just dirt and rocks. There's nothing else out there, maybe one Bedouin tent with people. I don't know why they're living out there. There's not a drop of water. There's not a plant within 1,000,000 miles of this place. And for Moses, he doesn't care. Because that's where God is. Does that make sense? And by the way, and we'll end with this, notice both houses in this parable get hammered. Have you noticed that? It's not like you build your life on the Shetiah. It's not like you have a sense of God and the life just sails along. Both houses just get hammered. But one stands firm. My dad, unfortunately, he's 82. He slipped and fell on his patio. I got a call at about noon, raced down to the hospital. He broke his hip in 4 places. He's in the hospital bed. I was pretty scared when I got there, but we just laughed, and I just kept joking and talking and stayed there for a while. He and my mom got him moved up to another room. They had surgery by that night, but he got up to his other room waiting for the surgeon to come. And he said, I'm laying here, and all I'm thinking about is what I got to do. He said, who's going to pick up the food at Costco to take it to the homeless shelter on Thursday? And who's going to disciple my guys at the rehab center in Oakland? And he said, who's going to teach my Sunday school class on Sunday? And then he stopped. And he was in his bed, and he was staring at the ceiling. And he said, the Lord's my shepherd is with me. And little tears kind of ran down. He was so relaxed. My dad's a big baby, by the way. He's a horrible patient. I've never seen him this calm ever when he's had something go wrong. The presence of God within you. You are, to God, the center of the center of the center of the center. He can think of no greater place to live than within you. Enjoy it. Recognize it. Remember it. Jesus, knowing ourselves even halfway, we have trouble believing that you want to dwell here. But we choose to know and believe that you do. Would you, through your Spirit, remind us regularly, daily, regularly within the day, that you don't dwell amongst us, you dwell within us. That we go nowhere apart from your living presence. Father, let us think on it. Let us pore over it. Let us remember it. Let us
put signs up in front of ourselves to recognize Him, to the point that we actually just huddle inside over the thought. You are the great Shetiah. And we deeply say